So there we are now recording. So this will be available later online to be able to watch again or share with a colleague. And something we're trying new this year is rolling it into our LMS. You may have seen that when you registered. For those of you who have an account in that learning management portal there, we will upload it in there and then kind of link your account with that. So now you'll have kind of a nice running total of the webinars that you participate in, and you'll also have that recording there as well. And if you aren't part of the LMS, we do also upload this onto YouTube. So, and we'll be sure to email you a link with the recording that can be accessed there as well. So, all right, well, without further ado, then we'll dive in here. Mainly, it'll be kind of back and forth. I've got a PowerPoint presentation here that kind of really summarizes the point, but then we can kind of go back and forth and actually show the feature or topic in ARM. And if there's questions, of course, then kind of put up some position in some scenarios if there's questions. So the first one here is not specifically tied to the software, but more about the online training platform that we just spoke about. And so kind of the newest thing there, we did add a new course or a new certification that you can access, and is really geared towards not so much necessarily brand new beginners, but somebody that's maybe been using ARM for a few years. We kind of wanted to make sure there were some training offerings for those type of users as well. And so here we have kind of a recurring course, staying current with ARM is kind of the name we gave it. Really, the goal is let's summarize all of the updates and changes that we've added in ARM across the whole year. And then maybe in that off season, kind of at the end of the year, beginning of the next year time frame, we compile this course so you can take it and refresh yourself with any updates, so that way you're ready to go for the next year. So the first iteration is for ARM 2021, and the idea being all of the updates that have happened over the course of the 2020 research season. Then you can make sure you catch up and know all about them, so that way you're ready for 2021 research is kind of the way we're labeling that. And so that's in that LMS portal if you've signed up and been there before. Otherwise, there's the link as well if you want to check that out. So. All right, so diving into ARM itself, then we'll focus here first on the site description section, and specifically the contact. We've had a little bit of recent development here on this section, and we added a shortcut button in the section where you have the contact itself, where you're describing where that person is and all of their details. There is a button for you to be able to hide that contact. So we have study rules for hiding certain pieces of information. And so really for most entry fields in a trial, you can right click on it and add a study rule to hide that information. So that way, and you can control who sees it and who doesn't. Typically you would say, if you are not in my company, then you should not be able to see this information. It's typically how that's set up. So anything confidential that maybe if you were to send to a trialist, if you're a sponsor and gonna contract out that research, but you have some piece of information that maybe that contractor couldn't see, that's kind of the scenario maybe that gets mostly used with that hidden rule. And so the only downside, if you wanted to hide some details of a contact, would be you'd have to click on each and every one of those pieces of information in that contact that you'd want to hide. Click on each one, right click, and add that study rule. That would be pretty time consuming. So this button here kind of automates that step. And so it might be a little small to see, but that icon is an eyeball with a slash through it to signify hidden. And so really that is going to add a study rule, and actually 19 study rules typically, because there's 19 different fields all related to that one contact. So that will hide all of those pieces of information for that particular contact there that you click the button for. And so if I just open up a trial here, I'll kind of demonstrate that for you. Here in my contacts section of the site description, here I'm just using a tutorial file, so it's got kind of a bunch of made up people here. But each contact, so here I've got my study director, and then I've got the investigator. They have their own sections. And so we've added this collapsible panel, so you can kind of shrink and increase the size with each field here. We've got the cooperator, and maybe we want to hide this information. So all we really need to do is just press this button, and we can decide then, are we hiding all of these cooperator contact fields? And then this is really how you can decide who should not see this information, essentially. So if it's not me, so really anyone who opens up this trial that's not my license will not be able to see this information. A little bit loose rule might be a little more appropriate, just depending on the situation, not in my company. So when you log into ARM, ARM knows what company you belong to, and so anyone outside of your company that logs in and opens this trial would not see this information. In general, that's one we recommend just for study rules in general, a little bit looser, so someone else in your company could see the rule and adjust the rule. So we'll choose that one here to hide all of the cooperator fields if you're not in the company. When we click that, it's actually going to go ahead and add all of those study rules. And so here there's just a confirmation, so we know exactly what happened. We've added 18 study rules with just one simple click. And so since I am allowed to see this information, nothing has changed really on the screen. I can still see the details, but you can see in the study rules editor now we have 18 hidden field rules. And specifically, it's the cooperator role, the description, the name, the title, all of those details, organization, address. So all of these individual values now have a study rule to hide that information. And so I'm going to save this and actually close the study and then open it up with a different license. I have a kind of a dummy test license on my machine. It is really handy then to kind of toggle back and forth. So as ARM closes here, it's just building my backup migration file to save all of my settings. Then I will open up this file again, and we will see with a different license. And this test license that I have is a different company than the license that I had just opened. I was in with my license tied to GDM Solutions, and now this one is a test. So there's my logins on the other screen, but it's just one kind of handy for. Oops, not. There we go. This now is outside of the company, and in a sense, if we think of maybe the sponsor contractor type of scenario, the sponsor could add this rule and then send it to the trialist, or maybe vice versa in the case of a contact where you would have some information of maybe the landowner or the farmer that was involved, but their information you would need to hide and not send on, kind of spurred on by the GDPR type of protecting information that you're not allowed to share. So here now in this trial, if we go to look, we do not have any cooperator visible. And I can even make sure show all fields. I've got my study director and the investigator. We didn't want to hide theirs information. Sponsor was never filled in, but there is no cooperator present. So all of their information has been completely hidden from other users outside of the organization. So that's really the goal of this rule, is to hide that information. So it would not be shared if you don't maybe have the permissions to do so or need to hide that. A little note here for the other contacts. Let me just show that on the screen here. So those were kind of the built-in, you always have the sponsor, the investigator, the study director, and the cooperator. Those are kind of built-in contacts on the screen. We do also have a repeating section at the bottom of this where you can add more contacts, and you can define exactly what role this person has. Maybe I also have a data manager that I want to be sure gets documented here. Maybe that is myself. Maybe I'll add myself as the data manager here, and what have you. So you can add additional contacts, and then I can simply, if I right click here, I can insert another repeating section. I can add another contact. So you can continue to add additional contacts as needed. And so here, just kind of a bullet point with the way that study rule works and how it is linked to those particular fields. If you choose to hide, use this feature to hide one of these other contacts, it actually does hide all of the other contacts because it's kind of a repeating section. So each of them are in some ways the same. So when you hide the one, you actually hide all of the other contacts, if you will. So that's the kind of the addition here for your study contacts. The next one here is a pretty short one, just about the weather import. So if you are in a trial, we have the weather table in ARM where you can define, document what weather had occurred at the trial site. And we have a import feature, has been there for maybe a couple of years now, where you can import weather data and specifically kind of train ARM. Here's my spreadsheet from my weather station, wherever I get it from. You can train ARM to know what columns of data your spreadsheet has, and then where ARM should put the pieces of information from your Excel sheet into the ARM trial, specifically the weather table. And so that's the feature we're talking about. We just added a couple of options for that import, specifically kind of when you're setting up that spreadsheet, specifically just to define the format of that spreadsheet. And so if you're typically that spreadsheet, it would be saved in a CSV file, so kind of a comma separated values is kind of what that is short for. But depending on what region of Windows you have, some regions, instead of using a comma, would use like a semicolon for separating the individual values in the file that kind of create the column. And then, of course, also the decimal symbol can vary depending on your region. Here in the U.S., we use a comma for the delimiter and a period for your decimal, but in other places around the world, it can be kind of switched around, and you have comma as your decimal value. And so we just needed to open that ability. So depending on how your spreadsheet was saved, it might have, it would match your region settings. So we needed to be able to specify that in ARM. So you can now make sure that ARM will read that spreadsheet correctly because it knows, how values are separated and the decimal place, being able to customize that. Really, this came from a support question where their CSV file that they were trying to use, the delimiter was a semicolon, and ARM just wasn't recognizing that at all because it was looking for commas, and so it just thought the data was all one big single column and couldn't make any sense out of it. So in most cases, you probably won't have to adjust that. Any existing weather import settings that you have should be unaffected because I'm certain those are probably the settings you already were using. But now if you were having any troubles getting the feature to work, that might have been the trouble. And now you can specify that setting. All right, next section here we'll focus on is data, so the assessment data section, and specifically working with subsamples. So when you're taking more than one data value at a specific plot or a particular assessment, then in ARM we call those subsamples. And so we did quite a bit of work here, just making the process a little bit smoother, more straightforward. I think before it was just a little bit clunky to work with subsamples in ARM, and so here we actually created a little wizard to make it just a little more straightforward and guide people through the process to make sure that their intention is clear and ARM is doing the thing that the user wanted them to do and not something else. So previously in the tools menu, you had a command to either add subsamples or delete subsamples. But then it was kind of confusing. Are you talking about the particular column that you're at, or are you talking about the whole trial? And so it'd be kind of confusing exactly what scope you might be editing. So now instead, we have a wizard that will specifically ask and ask what are we focusing on? What are you trying to edit? And then let's make sure we are editing the right thing. And so here it's going to ask, okay, where are you wanting to edit the number of subsamples? Are you in a data column right now and you want to change how many subsamples are in this data column? Do you want to select one or more columns to change the number of subsamples for? Or are we talking all columns? Are we talking about trial-wide, all of the data columns should have a particular number of subsamples? And then depending on the choice that you make, ARM will bring you and perform the actions that is needed. So if I just kind of demonstrate that here, if I go into the assessment data, and for example, here, my first data column, I actually have 10 subsamples. And maybe I'll clear out the data here because it wouldn't make sense, of course, to be changing subsamples if we didn't, if we already had data entered. So let's just say I've planned to do 10 subsamples here, and maybe something's changed and we can't, or it was just, kind of a typo. I didn't want 10. I only need 5. Right? We really intend only to do 5 in this case. What we can do is under the Tools menu, the Edit menu. Now we edit subsamples. Instead of saying whether we're adding or deleting, just simple, let's edit the number of subsamples. And so now that's the question here, like we saw on the screen, where are you talking about? And we can say here we are clicked into data column 1. So that's where ARM understands you are looking. Is that the column that you want? Or should we select different columns or all of them? So for now, we'll say, let's change just this one column. I want to change the number of subsamples. So then if we say next, really the way to do this is to, in the number of subsamples header field, you change that value. And that really changes the number of subsamples in the column. And so this way, even whether or not the user knew that, here now we'll take them to that spot and specifically ask, how many subsamples do you want for column number 1? And so I can lower this down and say, I only need 5 for this. And really what that does then is we just change that number of subsamples value there in the header. And now you can see I have just 5 data entry points for my plot 101. Now I've got several other columns that have 10. Of course, I should probably clear out the data here. Because it wouldn't make any sense. Again, you wouldn't really be changing your subsamples if you have already entered the data. But if we just do this action one more time, we want to edit subsamples, and this time, let's say all columns. Okay, we're set up to 10, but really we want only 1. Okay, we're not doing subsampling at all in this particular trial. And now ARM actually updated the number of subsamples in every data column of the trial, and they set that value to 1. So it maybe save you some time, mostly just kind of a improvement for somebody maybe that's new and hasn't really used subsamples before, just a little bit more intuitive and making sure that they are fully aware of where to go, what to do, instead of having ARM do something that maybe wasn't intended because they thought they were changing subsamples somewhere else. Kind of related to this idea, and this is kind of one of the, I would almost call it a quirk of ARM, the way it acted before that we really simplified. Technically speaking, here we just showed have a couple of ways to change the number of subsamples in particular data columns. Behind the scenes, there is also kind of a property of a trial called maximum subsample. So just it's not really someplace that you see in the trial where you define that number, but when you first added more subsamples from the default of 1, ARM asked if you want to expand the trial to support more subsamples. And so that was really what it was updating, was the maximum subsamples of this trial. And so even though maybe one data column has 5 and another has 1, in total, in memory, we've allocated enough space for 10. And so it could kind of cause some confusion. Like if you created a data column and you made 10 subsamples, and then you went back and changed that to 1, and so now there's no columns that have subsamples, ARM might still have the maximum subsamples be set to 10. It just wouldn't make any sense because you changed that. You don't need that many anymore. And so kind of a behind the scenes type of situation, and one that maybe didn't come up a whole lot, but it would be very confusing if it did come up. Why is there still slots for 10 subsamples when I create a new data column? I only have 1 anywhere. And so previously, kind of the old way is you would delete subsamples, and that would be deleting them from the whole trial, and you'd have to go that way, and it's really didn't make sense. It wouldn't be something I think people would typically expect to have to do. And so really in this update now, we said, yeah, that doesn't make any sense for us to require people to do that. So that maximum subsamples value just updates automatically. So if I look now in this trial, we've changed all of the columns to 1, even though a minute ago we did have some with 10. And so if you look in the About study, the value here of subsamples, this used to, would have said 10 because we had created 10 before, and it wouldn't automatically bring itself down. But now it really doesn't make any sense for ARM to cling to that many, so it automatically changes that value based on pretty much the highest number of subsamples in one of your data columns in the study. So here it says 1. If I were to change column number 2 to 5 subsamples, and the rest of them are all 1, we will see that in that About study, that property of how many subsamples maximum we have is 5. And now if another column, we end up using 10, that just automatically, again, adds. ARM didn't have to ask us, do you want to expand the size of this trial or anything? It just automatically does it. So kind of a quality of life thing where you might not even notice it because it's not pestering you anymore, but kind of a nice way to smooth things out, and maybe simpler for new users to understand. Them, I might be scratching their head like, this doesn't make sense. It's going to do that in the first place. So just a nice kind of behind the scenes update on how subsamples are working, and hopefully making it smoother. So this next one isn't specific to subsamples, but really is a nice utility for entering any type of data. And so we have added new shortcut buttons to the plot description. It's kind of hard to, of all the screenshots, this one's probably the most important. It's kind of hard to point out where it's at, but I suspect most people would recognize what we're talking about with the picture here. So where we've described the plot and really your randomization. We have new shortcut buttons that will display your trial map and will also sort by your assessment and harvest order. So your different movement orders, which you can define on the trial map. I'll just kind of show this one in action here. And so we'll go to something with just one subsample. On your trial map, we of course can define your plot layout, and there is a tab down at the bottom for movement arrows. And so if we choose our assessment order, ARM draws arrows on this map, and you can control and define a particular order that you would traverse your plot, or your trial, I should say. Because of course, it would probably not make a lot of sense if you're walking through the field and you do 101, 102, 103, you get down to the end. Are you going to walk all the way to the start so that way you can stay in order and rate 201 next? Maybe that's not very practical. Instead, when I'm down here, how about I just hop to the next plot across here and do 205 and then work my way back. And so just depending on the crop, depending on your field and what order you typically go through, you can define the order that you would walk through the field. And so we've got, if you look at this drop down there is a lot of different options. And I think we have just about every combination other than maybe walking on the outside and then slowly spiraling it. I think that's about the one we haven't added, but reverse within blocks, you can just stick to within your blocks. You can go across blocks, all sorts of combinations of whether you're serpentining across the blocks. This depends on your trial. So this is kind of a nice way to define how you would go through it. So here we'll choose the serpentine. Maybe for the assessment, I'm on foot, I'm walking through the plots, and so this is the order that I would go through and make my assessment. The harvest order is really the exact same thing. It's defining a movement through the trial, but a lot of times maybe harvest is different because you have a combine. You're harvesting with some other equipment instead of yourself going and looking at the plots. And so a lot of times this direction will be different. Maybe in this case, it's going to be across blocks. Our equipment is just going to be going down the rows, and so that'll be the order that the harvest data would come in. And so really, it's just another way to define a direction, the order of the plot. And so when you define those on the trial map, then you can sort by those on the editor. You're going to actually enter in the data. So we have a toolbar here, so you can sort by the assessment order. And so now we have 101, 102, 3, 4, 5, and now 205 is next, 204, 203, just like we saw on the trial map. So this can be real handy if you have your data sheet, you wrote down your values, you can just go down the line and key in the values without having to hunt for each plot because it's in the order that you took the data. So the nice thing is instead of having to come up here to do the sort on the toolbar or under tools and sort by your assessment order, these shortcut buttons will automatically sort. So here, if I click the little notepad, that sorts by the assessment order. If you want to sort by plot, you can just click on the heading here. So there's our plot order. So it's just a simple one click. Okay, I'm sorted by my assessment order. Now I can key in my assessment. And of course, the same thing with the harvest order. And so here you can see 101, 201, 301. So just kind of getting that closer so you're not hunting across the screen. Really nice and close here. And then the trial map, of course, brings up the trial map, and it also takes you to the movement arrows options automatically. So kind of a subtle nudge for people that it ties in with those other buttons that we added. Just some nice shortcuts, hopefully save a little bit of time here and there. And this one we kind of showed as well here. So the sort commands, previously on the toolbar, they actually had two different commands. So one was sort ascending and sort descending, and then you chose how you wanted to sort by. We kind of combine that. Let's just make that into one button. And as you saw when I clicked on it, then it drops down your options. You can sort by ascending, and then you can choose how you want to sort, or sort descending, choose how you want to sort. And then of course, those other, the assessment and harvest orders are there on that menu as well. And these options do depend on what editor you're on. So of course, the assessment data is where you do most of the sorting. We can sort by all of these different values really tied to the randomization. If we're in the treatments editor, of course, we can't sort by plot. That doesn't make any sense. And so we can see there's really nothing to sort by here. So that one is kind of specific to where you are on the screen as well. Kind of help to guide you to not, you can't sort by something that you can't see on the screen. So hopefully a simplification there. Just combining them all into one toolbar option, and then the same thing on the right click as well. And so again, previously with the right click, you would sort ascending or sort descending and then have the sub option. Here it's just combined into one main option, and then you can choose if you want to sort by treatment number or whatever. All right, moving along here. So the other big category of changes we made really land on the AOV means table report, and so maybe the other summary reports, but I think that's the kind of the big ticket report that most people run. Is the main analysis is that AOV means table report. And so pretty much everything else we're covering here is specific to that, thinking of our data. So the first one was just a little bit of coupling some options around. And so the descriptive statistics that you could include on a report, they were on the main report options section, but as anyone who's used ARM knows, there's a lot of options in the reporting. And so this was a nice opportunity for us to move those descriptive statistics to a separate tab, have its own section. And you'll see here we added some new options we'll dive into, but this was a good time then, since we're adding more things, let's get this off of that screen, so that way it simplifies it a little more. Let me actually close this file and just reopen it, since I got rid of all my data. Now we'll want that data back here, so that way we can run a report. But just real quickly, if we bring up that print report, for the AOV means table, those options were here. So underneath the mean descriptions, we had the descriptive statistics. And so now we've shortened up this list a little bit, and they have their own tab. And we've colored this. It won't remain colored forever, but we kind of just wanted to highlight that in this version, so people know that they moved. And then in another update here, probably sometime later this year, that yellow will go away, and it'll just be a normal tab once everyone's kind of gotten accustomed to that. So now looking at this descriptive statistics section, we added some new options. And the first one is really the ability to specify how your tests for normality are calculated, and really how they're reported on the report. And so the default here is the residual. The other option is assessment. Essentially, how do you want to calculate those, the assumptions of AOV? We have particular tests that we can run statistical tests to see whether we're fitting those or not. And so really the residual, that's your default. That's the more contemporary statistical approach we're really been pushing with the column diagnostics panel. And so really we added the column diagnostics panel. We're kind of encouraging people to use that for data review. The only trouble was you couldn't get all of those values that you saw in the column diagnostics weren't on the report yet. So that was the big push here, was to bring those values, that analysis, into the reporting as well. And so by default, residuals will be chosen, and that matches what you would do on the column diagnostics. We did still want to keep it an option, though, if you did want kind of the historical approach. Maybe if you're opening up, you have a report from a couple of years ago and you want to match that or something like that. We want to make sure to be able to, not close off an opportunity. So if you do want to run the test for normality, the skewness, kurtosis, and Levine's or Bartlett's are really the tests that we're talking about here. If you want those to be run on the raw values instead of the residuals, then you can turn that option on and kind of see that historical analysis. But really, the industry is really going towards analyzing the residuals. And really, that's the unknown error that you have in the study, and that's really what you want to investigate and look at. So that's really just kind of where the industry is going on that, and we're trying to bring that then into ARM. The next option here is also on that Descriptive Statistics tab, and it's also to bring in some of those details and information you have on the column diagnostics, bringing it into the report. And so the diagnostic graphs that you can generate on the column diagnostics, those now you can turn on in the report to include those as well for each column. You can choose the layout as to kind of how many of these graphs are fit onto a page. So it's the exact same thing you would see if you open up your trial and view the column diagnostics and view the diagnostic graphs. It's the exact same graph that you would see there, just now included in the report as another page. So just to kind of show that in action here, again, we're on that Descriptive Statistics. The normality test we'll have on the residuals, that's the default, and then the diagnostic report. I think this is probably turned off by default, but you can certainly come in here and turn it on and then choose the layout. And it depends on how many data columns you have, how many more pages you would want with the diagnostic report. If I maybe preview the report here, we'll see then it turns on the data a bit. It's got about five or six columns. Just zoom in a little bit. You have your AOV means table, of course. It looks the same as always. And so we have our data columns, and then going down here to this page underneath your report, then now we get to diagnostics. And so you have the diagnostic graph all included for each column. So this would be column number 1. You can see assessment 1, and then let's see if it just goes right. Following the next page is column number 2, column 3. So you get each of those diagnostics. So that's kind of why I chose a 4x2. You fit all 4 graphs on one page, but you could, if it's a little hard to see, the 2x2 works pretty well. You just end up with twice as many pages, essentially. I preview that just to see that you'll end up with twice as many pages, but if you're not printing it out, it might not matter as much. So it's a lot easier maybe to see. There's the diagnostics page here. You have two on the top and 2 underneath, and that's it for that page. And then the next page, you still have the assessment 1, the other 2 graphs. So that's kind of the new added tools here in the descriptive statistics. Really bringing the information in the column diagnostics review process, bringing that into the report. The other big change here for the AOV report is bringing in an arithmetic mean. Oh, sorry, we actually have a question here. I'll just step back before we dive into that. If we can get a CD value rather than LSD. So I guess I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what CD stands for. We have a CV, the coefficient of variation, but as far as the LSD option, if you are running two keys, you do get the HSD value instead, but typically that this is just displaying the least significant difference value, kind of from if you were running the mean comparison test for the LSD, that is on there. But I'm not sure what CD is short for. If that's a slightly different test, the critical difference. So we have, yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with that. So I guess probably the short answer is I don't think we do. There is some mean descriptions where you can see the like the standard error. I'm guessing it's probably a little bit different than what you're talking about, because this would be on the individual treatment. Yeah, if you're using that CD value, if you'd want to drop me a note, maybe what that is, or I can consult our statistician. Peter might be familiar with that. Yeah, if that's used a lot in your area, definitely something we can consider adding for ARM. We definitely want to have whatever you and your industry is using, have that as an option. So we'll be sure if you just want to maybe drop us a note of what you typically need there. That would be very interesting. So. All right, the next one here is the arithmetic mean. And so really this is for the scenario where you have a data column that needs to be transformed. And so if I go into my trial here, and I've kind of set this one up here specifically for this scenario. So I have my data column 1 with values. Actually, maybe I'll focus on the subsamples. Let's just focus on column number 4. Column 4 has my data entered in it, and then I've actually just copied and duplicated the very same data in column number 5, just to compare the two, because in column 5, I have added an action code AS. So you may see this in the column diagnostics. If your data doesn't fit the assumptions of AOV, you need to do a data correction transformation. And so the AS or the AL or the AA are kind of the data correction transformations. The nice thing is it doesn't change the data that you've entered, and it only calculates that transformation when you're reporting. So that's kind of the backdrop for that. But once you do transform the data, then you compile your treatment means, you perform the mean comparison, do the AOV analysis, all of that. The trouble is those treatment means now don't always mean a whole lot. I mean, what is the square root of our kilogram? You know, you really don't think in terms of that. And so if ARM just simply reports the transformed treatment means, that might not mean a whole lot. So previously, kind of the answer to that was to de-transform those means. And so that's here, kind of the data correction transformations I'm talking about. Kind of the same thing can apply for missing data estimates. You have missing data, the analysis can adjust the data so that way it can proceed with the analysis. And so ultimately you have these treatment means that might not technically be real life, hard to relate to, or if you were to de-transform the mean, now that becomes a weighted mean. You don't get back to the true raw, arithmetic mean that you had in the first. so that was kind of a confusing point, just in general with reports, and using that D-transform value wasn't always what people necessarily wanted either in their final reports and for registrations and such. And so we added this new option to include the arithmetic mean on the report. And so essentially, it's kind of a way to separate out, okay, here we have whatever analyzed means were used because of the way the statistics need to be run. These means were used in the analysis, and that's what we want to see. Here I've got these dashed lines that really just mean there was no significance between my treatments in this column, but we have the analyzed means and the statistics. We want to know the results, but I also want to show just before statistics did anything, what were the raw means, what really happened in some senses. And so that's the highlighted, the new option here. And so that is an option in the mean description section. So let me just bring up my AOV options, might be a little easier to see. So in the main AOV options here, in the mean descriptions, you can now turn on the arithmetic mean. And that's kind of in comparison to the primary mean. So before you didn't have a checkbox for the primary mean, that was always just assumed that what's on the report. But we added this option just to really kind of make it clear the difference. And so now if I preview this report here, and then we'll zero in on my data columns here. So really the difference then is, here's my last data column. The top row again is the analyzed means. And so in this case, we had that square root function be applied kind of in the background, so that way we can run the analysis and trust the AOV report analysis and the results. And so that's really what was used in the analysis, but here now we have the arithmetic mean displaying. So you can see sometimes they line up and sometimes they are a little different. And just depending on the values and the transformation you apply, the difference might be more stark than this. Here in this case, it's pretty minimal difference. But in other cases, maybe if our values were larger themselves, then that square root transform is going to change the numbers more greatly. And so you would probably see a bit bigger difference. But really the goal here is just to allow users to really define what they want to report and include on the report. And so the can be a little tricky. Really this request came specifically from a few different places, primarily in Europe. A lot of the registration occurring in Europe, the registration officials really wanted those arithmetic means present and didn't want the D-transform means. They really need the raw, what actually happened of sorts on the reports. And so, for some people, I think they'll see this and go, great, I've really been waiting for this. But others might be scratching their heads. So really just wanted to provide a quick little, if you're not sure what the heck I'm talking about, what should I do? And really it maybe comes down to the audience that you're planning the report for. And so if it's a non-statistical audience, really the focus is on the results. And so, we would recommend you could include the arithmetic mean, because they can look at those means and know that's what happened. That makes sense to me. That's what happened. And then you really don't need to de-transform the means. They can see the mean comparison letters and be content with that. Okay, that makes sense. So that's the analysis side. Really, here we've split up the column into the analysis side. That's in yellow, and then the raw means, what actually happened, quote unquote, in green. So I think that can be kind of a nice way to present it. making a clear distinction that this is the analysis and what was done, and then that is for your reference essentially of what the raw values for a statistical audience, and it might vary, of course, with what they want. But when in doubt, I think the statistical audience, really that de-transform means option that was already present makes a lot of sense. And so really, I think it's simple just to do that. A statistician or somebody that really has that technical knowledge can understand these are weighted means, the math behind that. I think is fine to pass off as onto that audience. So just some general guidelines, of course. This depends on what your audience, and if you know your audience targets, what type of information they would want. But just some guidance if you're not quite sure, and it all sounded like a lot of mathematical mumbo jumbo. So. Finally, one more kind of analysis oriented option here, going back actually now to our subsample data again. And so with a column with subsample data, kind of combining that with our automatic transformations again. And so now with ARM 2021, those automatic transformations are applied to the plot mean. So previously, as you'd imagine, your data column with the individual subsample values, when we went to analyze the data, each individual subsample value would be transformed with the square root, the arc sign, or the log transform in the background. We do each of those individual values, then you would average them to the plot level. So now you have a single plot value for each of those to combine those subsamples, and then you get treatment means and do the typical AOV and all of that. Really, though, the AOV analysis that doesn't look at subsamples. Where really the AOV analysis analyzes the plot means and summarizes on the plot mean level. It really doesn't make a difference to the AOV whether you had subsamples or not from just the calculation standpoint. And so really the transformations should also do this thing. And so now instead of applying the transformation to the individual subsample values, we first average those at the plot level. And now at each plot, we transform the plot value with that automatic transformation you've defined, and then run with the analysis like we always have. So it's maybe a little bit splitting hairs, just about, depending on how big of a math nerd you might be. I'm a math major myself, so I enjoy diving into the math behind it. But in a lot of cases, it's probably a little overkill. But really, it's just kind of being consistent is the goal. And so you can, however, control this function. So by default now with 2021, you'll, like we said here, those automatic transformations will be applied to the plot mean, and statistically that makes sense. So if you want to stop listening at that point, that's great. But for those of you that might want to control that function, if you're still in the middle of final reports or something, want to ensure things are consistent, we did make this an option, so it could be turned off if needed. And so you'll find that in the general summary, there's an option that states, automatic transformations apply to the plot means if there's subsamples present. So if you need to, you can turn this option off, and that will revert to the old way, essentially, of how those automatic transformations are applied. But we recommend leaving it on because it just makes more sense. It's more consistent with the analysis to apply those there. And that does add the ampersand symbol to the action code, and that's only within the report. So if I show that here again, my data column 1 and 2 are really the exact same, and the only difference is I do have an automatic transformation here. And so in my report, under the general summary, this is where that is being applied. And so in the report itself, you will see that an ampersand gets put in front of that action code, and it's just the way that, so there's the ampersand A, and then there's a D code to explain that on the report. So telling us that that ampersand means that the transformation was applied to the plot means of the subsample. Again, might not result in a huge difference. You won't all of a sudden notice that all the analysis is so much different than it was before, but really just aligning things to be more consistent. And again, really only applying to subsample data. Analyzing subsamples is really only where this even really applies or makes a difference. All right, we're getting close to the end here. I get a little long-winded, I'm sure here, but one last feature. If you were joined us last week for our previous webinar, I kind of cut off at the end a little quick because actually the last thing we showed was actually enhanced by this new feature. And so kind of specific for the summary across trials add-in, where you are analyzing multiple trials together, we added an option to choose and allow certain data columns that might be marked as non-analyzable within a trial. You can turn it on so that those data columns can be included in ST. And so really the background here is that previously certain data columns were just automatically excluded from all ST summaries. They were just dropped out before you even defined anything in your criteria of how to bring trials together. Those data columns were dropped out because at a trial analysis level, they're really not analyzable. And so to kind of define what I mean by non-analyzable, kind of a couple of different types, different scenarios that can have a non-analyzable data column. And the first one here is there are a couple of action codes where you specifically tell ARM not to analyze that data. They both start with N. So the first one, just the action code of N, says do not analyze the data, no statistics, no mean comparisons, and just report the data from the first replicate on summary reports. And then if you've used the NM action code, that doesn't analyze the data and just reports treatment mean. So for whatever reason that you might choose within a trial, you can mark a column this way so that the analysis is not performed. A common one could be kind of related to the detransform option we talked about before, to try to get those raw means on there. And that's kind of where the request came in. The other type would be a calculation that causes kind of the same value across replicates. So there's a few different transformations in ARM that are kind of per treatment. So like an Abbott per treatment, when you go to calculate in a trial, then you end up with the same value, the same calculation across all of your replicates, the same value. And so within a single trial, now there's no variability in the treatments, and so there's nothing for the AOV to do. So there's no analysis in the trial. But that doesn't mean that when you combine that trial with several other trials, now you have some variability, and so we actually can analyze something. So that's kind of why it would make sense to allow this option now when you're combining trials. Let's allow these columns in and be summarized if we want. So that's kind of the short version, kind of like the other option. It might not be something that you've been you even knew was a thing, but if you are one of the few that have been kind of struggling with that, that option is there, so you can access those columns in it. So that's the end of my slides, and we are kind of at the end of our hour allotment. I want to respect people's time. So if anyone does have to go, I appreciate you joining today. I did get a little long-winded. I'm definitely free to hang on for another five minutes or however long we would need. If somebody does have a question, I don't want to leave you out in the cold either. So I'm free for a few more minutes, but want to let everyone else off the hook if desired. So again, we're recording this session, and you'll get an email from us probably later this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at when we get that uploaded. So I appreciate you guys all taking the time to join us, and maybe we'll see you at a future webinar as well. Thanks everyone, and again, I'll hang on here for a minute or two. If you do have questions, feel free. I don't want to cut you off, but want to let anyone else on. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Matt, I don't know that anyone will want to listen to this if you're recording it, but I did just want to ask you a practical question. I've been using ARM a lot over the last couple of years, and then hadn't used it for some years before that, but did use it a long time ago. So I keep finding things now that are new to me, which have been in the system a long time, which is good.
Yeah.
But there's one particular thing came up today. A colleague asked me about pasting tables into the instructions page, so nothing at all to do with what you were looking at today. And I don't know if it's something you know about, but if you're a veteran user, you probably do. So in the protocol instruction page, just above where you're, we are creating protocols to send out. So I'm in a sponsor company, and we create protocols to send out to field contractors, and we need to make sure we have the information in a clear, readable format. So one way we like to do that is to paste tables into this instruction page. And what happens is they go so wide and then they disappear over to the right. And all I wanted to know is there some secret setting somewhere that can be altered to allow this, or is that just the way it's set up? So for example, I'd be pasting from an Excel sheet, and some of the columns would just not show up because it's too wide, I guess, for the page.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So these instruction fields, in general, we call them RTS, or rich text fields. So you click into one and you kind of have that almost like a Word document here, where you can have formatting. And yeah, they're really great for tables and pictures and things like that. I know that the default here, and something we've changed maybe a year or two ago, is that the width of the field matches your page settings.
Okay.
So really the idea of, okay, if I'm going to print this out as a report, and whatever I have in this field is twice as wide as the page, what's going to happen?
With you. Yeah.
So that would be maybe how that would get cut off. And perhaps even just the workaround would be in your page setup. You could maybe even increase your page size. Maybe that would be more of the print setup. Have to dig a little bit to see, but yeah, essentially kind of changing your margins, and maybe your page size would make those columns stop disappearing, essentially.
Okay, that's really useful. I can fiddle with that later. And
great.
Philip, thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And just in general, that's something we see a lot in our training is your comments about not knowing it was there. It's probably been there for a while and I didn't know it was there. That's really our goal of all of these webinars, is because there's 18 million things you can do with ARM, and it's a matter of getting the word out and having people know what.
Yeah, well, just
possible.
like the weather import, that didn't used to be there when I remember doing it a long time ago, and it looks much better now. So
yeah, right. Yeah, so and that's kind of our goal here, is to get the word out, and these release notes and our webinars here kind of keeping people up to speed. An hour here, an hour there, just to know what's new. Hopefully can spawn some ideas. If nothing else, hey, I think there was this, and then you can go digging. So
And I saw someone else had a chat question, but before, maybe if I can quickly just
Yeah, go ahead.
finally add, the other thing is we're using these EAF exports, and somebody told me they might not be used in the future. And I just wanted to ask if that was a vicious rumor, or if you will still keep them in the new version.
Yeah, for sure, it wouldn't be something where just tomorrow you wake up and wait a minute, they're gone. You know, the export EDE is another one kind of similar in that same vein that maybe others would be familiar with. Just there are these different files that basically are exporting out the information you have in a trial to transport them to another database. I think is really what they're used for now. Is some of the global
Yeah.
sponsors have their master databases that have been around since the 90s, and so we have these connections, and so we definitely won't turn them off in the sense of just, oh, now what are we going to do? But we do, you know, moving forward, just as technology improves, you know, these EDE files are really an old way of processing data, and so long term, you know, wise, we want to phase them out so we can use, you know, better technology. You know, using like a database itself and having ARM dump the information right into a database is a lot more efficient, quicker, and you don't have that hassle of all the files. So that's long term, that's where we want to go, but isn't something we just want to kill off as soon as we can and let everyone scramble to figure it out. So
Okay. Thank you.
so yeah, it's a yes and a no for that
Okay.
one. So yeah, so thanks for the questions here. Yeah, there are a couple in the chat. The first one I think was sent directly to me, but the question is how to delete all of the data which we've inserted in a column. So if I quick open up that trial here again, so if you do have data in a column, I guess kind of depends on what you want to delete. If you want to delete the column itself, typically what I would do, and I'll just close the rules here, is just I usually just right click in the column I want to get rid of, and there's an option to delete the data column. And that's going to get rid of the description and the data, and it's just going to get rid of it entirely. And of course, anytime we're talking about removing data, ARM is going to ask you 2 or 3 times because it wants to make darn sure that this is what you want to do. And here it's noticing that actually column 1 and 2 have been linked together. And I'm just going to, and there's a calculated column on it, so this is a total mess. But that would be the way to get rid of everything. If you find, oh no, I entered in data here in column 2, but I was actually supposed to put it in column 4, what I would do is probably just click on the heading for column 2. It'll highlight all of the values. And then there's an edit clear function, Control D. You could also cut. Either one will just clear out those values. So then you could enter them, enter the right values in. Or if you did do that by accident, the undo will put them back, but the cut would let you paste them into a different column. That would be kind of how I would recommend that. Great questions here. One other question then about the assessment images. Trying to link, so in general, linking an image to a particular plot, specifically a value here that you enter them. But the trouble was that the file was enormously big, so it wouldn't send it to the sponsor. Yeah, and that is one kind of trouble with those images in general. Depending on the resolution and settings of your camera, they can get pretty large in size, or especially then when you have a whole bunch of them together. And so I guess I'll admit I'm not too savvy with the settings of pictures, but in general, I think the resolution would really be the biggest item to control how large that file gets. Another thing I've seen done, since just in general having a lot of pictures attached can be problematic for trying to email, like Outlook won't let you send a file that's too big, is that you send the individual trial through an email, and then you bring the pictures and you drop them in like a cloud drive, so something like Dropbox or OneDrive, something like that. The sponsor could, create a folder that's shared just between the sponsor and the contractor, and then you just dump the images there. And with the feature that you've attached to them, they are all named with the trial ID and the plot ID. So it's very easy. ARM can hook those back up easily. But that's kind of a nice way to get around some of the file size limit by just using the cloud storage. Or if you want to go old school, get a thumb drive, download all the files, and then mail it to the sponsor or whatever. Those I've heard people do before to kind of share that. Yeah, as far as taking the picture goes, I would look at your picture settings. Probably the resolution would be the biggest one of just how large those files get. And what was going on my screen here, there was a question as I was talking about that one, was the deleted data coming back, and I had just done an edit and undo. So again, I had cleared out, maybe in this case, I wanted to select all that data, and I cut the information out. Then I realized, wait a minute, I didn't want to do that. Under the edit menu, you can undo the action you just took last. And that's what was happening there. Sometimes it's supposed to just do it all at once, but in this case, it seems like it's putting the data in kind of one by one and slowly catching up. I wonder if it's because I might have a calculated column somewhere that's pulling things down. But great questions. We definitely like to answer whatever questions you have. I'll give a quick plug in the spirit of asking questions for our office hours webinar. We do pretty much what we did the last 15 minutes or so is I just answer questions, whatever people might have for questions. So if you have any more follow-up, something pops up, or you have a colleague that's asking you because you're the expert in the office, feel free to join our office hours webinars. So just every Tuesday, actually at this very time, we kind of stole this week's office hours in place of this. I just turn on my ARM and turn on my Zoom, and whoever connects and asks questions, we just go left and right on whatever questions we've got. You just got to register once just so you get the Zoom link, but it's far less formal than this. And you just connect, and whoever joins joins us. So, and you can ask any questions that you might have that week. But thanks everyone for joining us and for the good questions at the end. And just let us know if you have any other questions, and maybe we'll see you again here soon at another webinar. So.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Goodbye.